This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Robert Browning by G. K. Chesterton. Section 24, the last section, Chapter 8, The Philosophy of Browning, Part 3. We must recur, however, to the question of the main development of the Sludge self-analysis. He begins, as we have said, by urging a general excuse by the fact that in the heat of social life, in the course of telling tales in the intoxicating presence of sympathizers and believers, he has slid into falsehood almost before he is aware of it. So far as this goes, there is truth in his plea. Sludge might indeed find himself unexpectedly justified if we had only an exact record of how true were the tales told about Conservatives in an exclusive circle of Radicals, or the stories told about Radicals in a circle of indignant Conservatives. But after this general excuse, Sludge goes on to a perfectly cheerful and unfeeling admission of fraud. This principal feeling towards his victims is, by his own confession, a certain unfathomable contempt for people who are so easily taken in. He professes to know how to lay the foundations for every species of personal acquaintance, and how to remedy the slight and trivial slips of making Plato write Greek in noughts and crosses, as I fear, sir, he sometimes used to do, before I found the useful book that knows. It would be difficult to imagine any figure more indecently confessional, more entirely devoid of not only any of the restraints of conscience, but of any of the restraints even of a wholesome personal conceit, than Sludge the medium. He confesses not only to fraud, but to things which are to the natural man more difficult to confess even than fraud: effeminacy, futility, physical cowardice. And then, when the last of his loathsome secrets has been told, when there is nothing left either to gain or conceal, then he rises up into a perfect bankrupt sublimity, and makes the great avowal which is the whole pivot and meaning of the poem. He says, in effect, now that my interest in deceit is utterly gone, now that I have admitted to my own final infamy the frauds that I have practised, now that I stand before you in a patent and open villainy which has something of the disinterestedness and independence of the innocent, now I tell you with full and impartial authority of a lost soul that I believe there is something in spiritualism. In the course of 1,000 conspiracies, by the labour of 1,000 lies, I have discovered that there is really something in this matter that neither I nor any other man understands. I am a thief, an adventurer, a deceiver of mankind, but I am not a disbeliever in spiritualism. I have seen too much for that. This is the confession of faith of Mr. Sludge the medium. It would be difficult to imagine a confession of faith framed and presented in a more impressive manner. Sludge is a witness to his faith, as the old martyrs were witnesses to their faith. But even more impressively, they testified to their religion even after they had lost their liberty, and their eyesight, and their right hands. Sludge testifies to his religion even after he has lost his dignity and his honour. It may be repeated that it is truly extraordinary that anyone should have failed to notice that this avowal on behalf of spiritualism is the pivot of the poem. The avowal itself is not only expressed clearly, but prepared and delivered with admirable rhetorical force. Now for it, then. Will you believe me, though? You've heard what I confess. I don't unsay a single word. I cheated when I could, rapped with my toe joints, set sham hands at work, wrote down names weak in sympathetic ink, rubbed odic lights with ends of phosphor match, and all the rest. Believe that. Believe this. By the same token, though it may seem to set the crooked straight again, unsay the said. Stick up what I've knocked down. I can't help that. It's truth. I somehow vomit truth to-day. This trade of mine, I don't know, can't be sure, but there was something in it, tricks and all. It is strange to call a poem with so clear and fine a climax an attack on spiritualism. To miss that climax is like missing the last sentence in a good anecdote, or putting the last act of Othello into the middle of the play. Either the whole poem of Sludge the Medium means nothing at all, and is only a lampoon upon a cad, of which the matter is almost as contemptible as the subject, or it means this, that some real experiences of the unseen lie even at the heart of hypocrisy, and that even the spiritualist is at root spiritual. One curious theory, which is common to most Browning critics, is that Sludge must be intended for a pure and conscious impostor, because after his confession, and on the personal withdrawal of Mr. Horsfall, he bursts out into horrible curses against that gentleman, and cynical boasts of his future triumphs in a similar line of business. Surely this is to have a very feeble notion either of nature or art. A man driven absolutely into a corner might humiliate himself, and gain a certain sensation almost of luxury in that humiliation, in pouring out all his imprisoned thoughts and obscure victories. For let it never be forgotten that a hypocrite is a very unhappy man. He is a man who has devoted himself to a most delicate and arduous intellectual art, in which he may achieve masterpieces which he must keep secret, fight thrilling battles, and win hair's breadth victory, for which he cannot have a whisper of praise. A really accomplished impostor is the most wretched of geniuses. He is a Napoleon on a desert island. A man might surely, therefore, when he was certain that his credit was gone, take a certain pleasure in revealing the tricks of his unique trade, and gaining not indeed credit, but at least a kind of glory. And in the course of this self-revelation he would come at last upon that part of himself which exists in every man, that part which does believe in and value and worship something. This he would fling to his hearer's face with even greater pride, and take a delight in giving a kind of testimony to his religion which no man had ever given before, the testimony of a martyr who could not hope to be a saint. But surely all this sudden tempest of candour in the man would not mean that he would burst into tears and become an exemplary ratepayer, like a villain in the worst parts of Dickens. The moment the danger was withdrawn, the sense of having given himself away, of having betrayed the secret of his infamous Freemasonry, would add an indescribable violence and foulness to his reaction of rage. A man in such a case would do exactly as Sludge does. He would declare his own shame, declare the truth of his creed, and then, when he realized what he had done, say something like this: "You brute, beast, blackguard, cowardly scamp, I only wish I dared burn down the house and spoil your sniggering," and so on, and so on. He would react like this. It is one of the most artistic strokes in Browning, but it does not prove that he was a hypocrite about spiritualism, or that he was speaking more truthfully in the second outburst than in the first. Whence came this extraordinary theory that a man is always speaking most truly when he is speaking most coarsely? The truth about oneself is a very difficult thing to express, and coarse speaking will seldom do it. When we have grasped this point about Sludge the Medium, we have grasped the key to the whole series of Browning's casuistical monologues: Bishop Blougram's Apology, Prince Hohenstiel Schwangau, Fra Lippo Lippi, Fifine at the Fair, Aristophanes, Apology, and several of the monologues in The Ring and the Book. They are all, without exception, dominated by this one conception of a certain reality tangled almost inextricably with unrealities in a man's mind, and the peculiar fascination which resides in the thought that the greatest lies about a man and the greatest truths about him may be found side by side in the same eloquent and sustained utterance. For Blougram, he believed, say, half he spoke. Or, to put the matter in another way, the general idea of these poems is that a man cannot help telling some truth even when he sets out to tell lies. If a man comes to tell us that he has discovered perpetual motion, or has been swallowed by the sea serpent, there will yet be some point in the story where he will tell us about himself almost all that we require to know. If any one wishes to test the truth, or see the best examples of this general idea in Browning's monologues, he may be recommended to notice one peculiarity of these poems, which is rather striking. As a whole, these apologies are written in a particularly burly and even brutal English. Browning's love of what is called the ugly is nowhere else so fully and extravagantly indulged. This, like a great many other things for which Browning as an artist is blamed, is perfectly appropriate to the theme. A vain, ill-mannered, and untrustworthy egoist defending his own sordid doings with his own cheap and weather-beaten philosophy is very likely to express himself best in a language flexible and pungent, but indelicate and without dignity. But the peculiarity of these loose and almost slangy soliloquies is that every now and then in them there occurs bursts of pure poetry, which are like a burst of birds singing. Browning does not hesitate to put some of the most perfect lines that he or anyone else have ever written in the English language into the mouths of such slaves as Sludge and Guido Franceschini. Take, for the sake of example, Bishop Blougram's Apology. The poem is one of the most grotesque in the poet's work. It is intentionally redolent of the solemn materialism and patrician grossness of a grand dinner party ado. It has many touches of an almost wild bathos, such as the young man who bears the impossible name of Gigadibs. The bishop, in pursuing his worldly argument for conformity, points out with truth that a condition of doubt is a condition that cuts both ways, and that if we cannot be sure of the religious theory of life, neither can we be sure of the material theory of life, and that in turn is capable of becoming an uncertainty continually shaken by tormenting suggestion. We cannot establish ourselves on rationalism and make it bear fruit to us. Faith itself is capable of becoming the darkest and most revolutionary of doubts. Then comes the passage. Just when we are safest, there's a sunset touch, a fancy from a flower bell, someone's death, a chorus ending from Euripides, and that's enough for 50 hopes and fears, as old and new at once as nature's self, to rap and knock and enter in our soul, take hands and dance there, a fantastic ring, round the ancient idol on his base again, the grand perhaps. Nobler diction and nobler meaning could not have been put into the mouth of Pompilia or Rabbi Ben Ezra. It is in reality put into the mouth of a vulgar, fashionable priest, justifying his own cowardice over the comfortable wine and the cigars. Along with this tendency to poetry among Browning's knaves must be reckoned another characteristic, their uniform tendency to theism. These loose and mean characters speak of many things feverishly and vaguely. Of one thing they always speak with confidence and composure, their relation to God. It may seem strange at first sight that those who have outlived the indulgence, and not only of every law but of every reasonable anarchy, should still rely so simply upon the indulgence of divine perfection. Thus Sludge is certain that his life of lies and conjuring tricks has been conducted in a deep and subtle obedience to the message really conveyed by the conditions created by God. Thus Bishop Blougram is certain that his life of panic-stricken and tottering compromise has been really justified as the only method that could unite him with God. Thus Prince Hohenstiel Schwangau is certain that every dodge in his thin string of political dodges has been the true means of realizing what he believes to be the will of God. Every one of these meagre swindlers, while admitting a failure in all things relative, claims an awful alliance with the Absolute. To many it will at first sight appear a dangerous doctrine indeed, but in truth it is a most solid and noble and salutary doctrine, far less dangerous than its opposite. Every one on this earth should believe, amid whatever madness or moral failure, that his life and temperament have some object on the earth. Every one on the earth should believe that he has something to give the world which cannot otherwise be given. Every one should, for the good of men and the saving of his own soul, believe that it is possible, even if we are the enemies of the human race, to be the friends of God. The evil wrought by this mystical pride, great as it often is like a straw to the evil wrought by a materialistic self abandonment. The crimes of the devil who thinks himself of immeasurable value are as nothing to the crimes of the devil who thinks himself of no value. With Browning's knaves we have always this eternal interest, that they are real somewhere, and may at any moment begin to speak poetry. We are talking to a peevish and garrulous sneak. We are watching the play of his paltry features, his evasive eyes and babbling lips, and suddenly the face begins to change and harden, the eyes glare like the eyes of a mask, the whole face of clay becomes a common mouthpiece, and the voice that comes forth is the voice of God uttering his everlasting soliloquy. The end of section 24. The end of chapter 8. The end of Robert Browning by G.K. Chesterton.